They taught you how to speak politely, how to behave safely, how to think reasonably, and so you'd be accepted. But no one ever taught you how to think deeply. So deeply that society can no longer predict you. So deeply that the system no longer knows where to place you, because a mind like that is dangerous. You were trained to fit in, not to question. You were praised for memorizing answers, not for asking questions that shook the foundation. They handed you scripts, roles, identities, and you wore them well. But here's the truth no one wants to admit. The deeper you think, the more you realize how much of your life has been pre-written. Your beliefs, your ambitions, even your definition of success. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because deep thinking isn't about sounding smart. It's not about clever arguments or intellectual pride. It's about digging beneath the surface of everything you've ever trusted. Every belief, every desire, every truth you were told was unquestionable. And when you do that, the picture starts to melt. You were told life makes sense, that the rules are fair, that the system rewards the good, the patient, the obedient. But when you think deeply, truly deeply, you begin to see through it all. You see how much of it was built to keep you in line, to keep you aiming at the same targets as everyone else, to keep you busy chasing approval instead of asking why you needed it in the first place. Modern society doesn't fear rebels. It fears the man who stops reacting, the man who stops rushing, the man who sits in silence and starts asking questions that no one wants to answer. Because deep thought is slow, it's surgical. It doesn't accept that's just how it is. It keeps cutting until the illusion bleeds, and that makes you a threat. Because the world doesn't know how to handle someone who sees clearly. It knows how to reward performance, ambition, compliance. But clarity is dangerous. A deeply thinking mind doesn't need to raise its voice. It doesn't need to rebel loudly or break the rules. It simply stops playing, stops pretending, stops believing in the story that keeps everyone asleep. And just by doing that, just by seeing what others are still pretending not to see, you become untouchable. Not because you're above them, but because you're no longer bound by the same illusions. And here's what no one told you. The world doesn't collapse when you think deeply. It reveals itself. The noise fades, the lies unravel, and you're left face to face with the raw, unfiltered architecture of everything. The motivations behind your thoughts, the conditioning behind your habits, the invisible hands that guided your life without ever showing their face. It's not pretty, it's not safe, but it's real. And once you taste that kind of clarity, the kind that doesn't flatter your ego but slices through it, you'll never be able to go back. You'll never again be able to live inside the story you used to call truth. And maybe that's what they fear most. Not the loud, not the angry, but the quiet ones. The ones who sit still and see everything. The ones who stopped needing applause, stopped chasing approval, stopped performing for a world that lost its meaning a long time ago. Because once you start thinking for real, the whole thing begins to crack. And no system, no ideology, no crowd can hold someone who's already stepped outside the illusion. So no, you don't need to shout to become dangerous. You don't need to fight to become free. You just need to think deeply enough to see what the world has been trying to hide from you all along. And once you do, they won't know what to do with you anymore. Because now, you're not following the script. You're writing your own. And that is the beginning of everything. Kierkegaard once said, "The crowd is untruth." And now, you begin to understand why. Because the crowd doesn't want truth. It wants emotional safety. It wants agreement, not awakening. Repetition, not rupture. Harmony, even if it's built on lies. And when you start thinking deeply, when you stop nodding along, when you stop participating in the theater of polite illusions, you become a threat to that harmony. Not because you shout, not because you argue, but because you see, and that alone is enough to shake the room. See, the deeper you think, the more you realize how much of society is a consensus, not on truth, but on comfort, a shared agreement to not go too far, to not ask the hard questions, to not disturb the fragile balance we all pretend is stable. And when you do disturb it, they won't thank you. They'll punish you, not with violence, but with silence, with awkward glances, with labels like too intense, too negative, too serious. Because you've broken the emotional pact, you no longer play along with their carefully curated version of reality. You've stepped outside the crowd, and now they don't trust you. But here's the deeper truth. The more clearly you see, the harder it becomes to share what you see. Because the crowd doesn't speak in truth. It speaks in comfort. It speaks in safe feelings. And when you bring them truth, real, raw, uncomfortable truth, they won't say thank you. They'll turn away. They'll call you cynical. They'll say you're overthinking. They'll accuse you of being disconnected from real life. But Kierkegaard knew that real life, authentic life, begins the moment you walk away from the crowd. He called it subjective truth, not a truth approved by others, not a truth that wins applause, but a truth that lives only between you and your own conscience. No witnesses, no validation, just you, staring straight into the weight of what you now know. And that's where the cost begins, because once you've seen it, once you've pierced the illusion, you no longer live for agreement. You no longer need to be understood. You stop trying to be right in the eyes of others. Instead, you live for something deeper, something quieter, something far more terrifying. A truth that even you wish you could unsee, but can't. Because it's not just that the system is flawed, it's that the foundation is rotten. The stories we were told were never real. The values we inherited were never questioned. And now that you've seen it, you have no choice but to live by it, even when it isolates you, even when it costs you connection, even when it means walking alone, misunderstood and labeled difficult, because truth doesn't come with a crowd. It doesn't trend. It doesn't flatter. It demands something brutal, that you choose it, even when it breaks your heart. And that is where real thinking begins, not in the comfort of consensus, but in the pain of clarity. When you know you could pretend but choose not to. When you know you could stay liked but choose to stay honest. When you accept that your truth might make you alone, and you carry it anyway. That's the moment you cross over. You stop living for what others can understand. You stop performing the role they expect. And you start speaking, thinking, living from a place that no one else can confirm but you. And that's what makes you dangerous. Because the crowd only has power as long as you still need it, as long as you still seek its approval, as long as you still chase the safety of being seen, heard, and liked. But once you break that chain, once you become someone who thinks deeply and walks alone, they lose their grip on you forever. So if you're starting to feel distant from the people around you, if you're feeling harder to relate to, if you're seeing things no one else dares to look at, you're not broken, you're not too much, you're not crazy. You're just finally waking up. And the world doesn't like that, because truth, real truth, doesn't bring people together. It sets them apart. Now that you've stepped outside the crowd, now that you've dared to think for yourself, there's a new illusion waiting for you. A quieter one, more seductive, more invisible. It's the illusion of your own desires. Because even when you break free from society's rules, you may still be enslaved by something even more subtle. Your goals, your ambitions, your dreams. You call it purpose. You call it drive. You say you're being true to yourself. But what if you're not? What if what you call passion is just programming? What if the thing you're chasing, that one thing you need to succeed, to prove, to achieve, isn't even yours? Schopenhauer warned us, The will, the inner drive that pushes you forward, is blind. It doesn't care about truth. It doesn't care about peace. It only wants and wants and wants. And once it gets what it wants again. That's the trap. Because you can escape society's approval, only to become a prisoner of your own craving. You think you're building a free mind, but you're still being pulled by something you've never questioned: desire. Think about it. How many of your goals were born in silence, and how many were handed to you with applause? How many of your dreams come from you, and how many were sold to you through a lifetime of repetition, advertising, and imitation? You chase money, you chase mastery, you chase recognition, impact, greatness. But is it really you who wants these things? Or is it the blind will hijacking your thoughts, making you chase endlessly while calling it meaning? Because here's what Schopenhauer saw with terrifying clarity. The will is not rational. It's not noble. It's not enlightened. It's hunger. And when your mind is ruled by that hunger, your thoughts don't seek truth. They serve desire. Your intellect becomes a lawyer, not a seeker. It argues for your cravings. It builds justifications. It finds reasons to chase what you already wanted. And in that state, you're not thinking, you're rationalizing. You're not free. You're following the same loop over and over with new goals, new words, new justifications, but the same emptiness. So what do? You start by asking a question that most people never dare to ask. Do I want this because I truly want it? Or because I was programmed to? Because real thinking, deep thinking, begins there. Not with ambition, not with strategy, but with deconstruction. You strip your desires down to the bone. You don't trust them at face value. You don't let excitement decide what's true. You slow down and observe. You look at the dream you're chasing and ask, is this mine? Or is this just another leash? Painted gold? And here's the part no one tells you. Letting go of goals doesn't make you passive. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you clear. Because when your thinking is no longer hijacked by hunger, it becomes vision. It becomes sharp, still, and uncorrupted. It sees without flinching. It understands without needing to control. That's the moment your mind shifts from chasing to witnessing, from wanting to knowing. And the world won't understand. They'll say you've lost your drive, that you've changed, that you've given up. But they don't see what you see. They don't see that the fire inside you isn't gone. It's just no longer desperate, no longer begging, no longer blind. You've stepped off the hamster wheel. You've stopped running in circles, and now you're standing still, watching everything spin without you. And that stillness, that clarity, that rejection of the endless chase, that's the beginning of real thought. The kind that cannot be sold, the kind that doesn't serve hunger, the kind that sets you free. Kierkegaard didn't call it madness, he called it responsibility. Because once you've questioned your desires, once you've stopped chasing the goals society gave you, you don't become popular, you don't become a leader, you become alone. Not because you hate people, not because you want to isolate yourself, but because there's simply no one left to follow. You've seen too much, you've questioned too deeply, and now you no longer fit. You can't unknow what you know. You can't laugh at the jokes that reinforce the lie. You can't nod along when the room applauds something you no longer believe. You've outgrown the role you were handed, and that makes you a problem, because society has no space for people who think too deeply. It doesn't know what to do with those who refuse to play along. It can handle rebels, it can handle conformists, but it cannot handle someone who no longer needs the game at all. You can't pretend you didn't see it. You can't just enjoy the moment. You can't smile and agree to keep things easy. And so the world begins to push back, not because you're wrong, but because your clarity makes others feel seen in ways they've spent their whole lives avoiding. They'll call you difficult, too serious, too intense. They'll say you're overanalyzing, that you need to lighten up. But that's not what's really happening. What's really happening is that your presence confronts their denial. Because when you no longer seek approval, when you stop shaping yourself to be palatable, you become a mirror. And most people don't want to see what they've become. So they turn on the mirror. They reject it. They isolate it. Kierkegaard understood this better than anyone. He wrote about the existential stage, the moment when you stop living for the crowd and begin living for truth. Not absolute truth, not the kind written in books, but subjective truth, a way of being that is brutally honest, even when no one understands it. And that's the cost of deep thinking. You lose your place in the play. You stop being the character everyone is comfortable with. You stop participating in small talk, surface smiles, empty affirmations. You stop pretending to be okay just to keep the peace, and people notice. They sense that something about you is different, not in how you dress or how you speak, but in what you no longer need. You don't need to be liked. You don't need to be reassured. You don't need to be seen. And that makes them uncomfortable, because deep down they're still chasing that validation. They still need the applause, the agreement, the illusion that they're doing life correctly. But you've stepped off the stage, and now you're just watching, not with judgment, not with superiority, but with a quiet kind of responsibility. You know what's going on, and you also know that most people aren't ready to see it. So you walk alone, not because you want to, but because the deeper you think, the fewer places you can go without shrinking yourself. And here's the hard truth. The truly dangerous man is not the one who breaks the law. It's the one who no longer believes in the game behind the law. The one who refuses to play, not out of rebellion, but out of recognition. You've seen that the whole structure is built on performance, and you're done performing. And yes, that will cost you. You'll lose invitations. You'll lose friends. You'll lose the illusion of belonging. But what you gain is something most people never even touch. Self-possession, clarity, and a mind no longer shaped by the need to fit in. And that is where your real life begins. Not with approval, but with the quiet courage to stand in your truth, even when it costs you everything. Because in a world built on illusion, the man who dares to see clearly will always walk alone. Schopenhauer saw what most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid: the loop of wanting and the suffering it brings. By now, you've stepped outside the crowd. You've questioned your desires. You've faced the cost of clarity and paid for it in isolation. But there's still one more illusion the system is betting you'll cling to. One more chain it hopes you'll never break. The illusion of wanting. Because as long as you still want something from the system, you're still controllable. The promise of success. The reward of recognition. The idea of finally making it. These aren't just dreams. They're bait. The system whispers, keep going, keep grinding, keep dreaming big. Because when you're running, you're not thinking. When you're chasing, you're not seeing. And when you're wanting, you're still owned. But what happens when the wanting stops? What happens when you no longer need applause or status or comfort? When you stop negotiating with the world because you've realized it has nothing left to offer you? That's when you become dangerous. Because the system can manage rebels, it can silence critics, it can threaten dissenters. But the person who wants nothing, they can't be bought, they can't be bribed, they can't be seduced. They're not here to play, and they're not here to fight. They've simply walked away, not with bitterness, not with hatred, but with the quiet power of someone who's finally seen through the game and chosen not to play. Schopenhauer didn't call this apathy. He called it clarity, because what looks like detachment to the world is actually freedom. The person who no longer wants doesn't mean they've given up. It means they've seen through the cycle of craving and disappointment, through the promises that always come with strings, through the illusion that next time will finally make you whole. They're not chasing because they know the chase never ends. They're not striving because they've seen where striving leads, right back to the same hunger, dressed in a different costume. And here's what terrifies the system the most. This kind of person doesn't protest. They don't riot. They don't try to fix the machine. They simply remove their energy from it, silently, fully, permanently. They stop feeding it, stop needing it, stop believing in it. And suddenly, the machine loses a piece of its power, because one less person chasing the prize is one more person who sees that the prize was never real to begin with. That's why people like this make the world nervous. They don't look threatening. They're not loud or aggressive. They're calm, still, almost invisible. But that's exactly why they're so dangerous, because they're not participating, and yet they exist. They're living proof that freedom isn't found in climbing the ladder, but in stepping off it entirely. And once others see that, they start to question too. They start to wonder, what if I don't actually want what I was told to want? What if there's another way to live, not through rebellion, but through release? And that's the quiet revolution the system fears, not the ones with slogans and marches, but the ones that begin in silence, inside the mind of a man who's no longer willing to suffer for something he never truly wanted. So if you've reached that place where the things you used to crave feel empty, where the goals you once chased no longer light you up, where you no longer need to win to feel whole, you haven't lost your drive. You've reclaimed it. You haven't become passive. You've become immovable. And that's what makes you a threat, because the man who no longer wants can no longer be used. And in a world built on control, that kind of mind is the most dangerous thing of all. So now you've seen it, the system, the illusion, the endless loop of wanting, chasing, obeying. You've stepped outside of it, not in anger, but in awareness. And here's what you discover, standing in that silence. Deep thinking isn't a skill, it's a way of living. It's not about analyzing everything, it's about seeing through everything. It's about looking beneath the surface of your beliefs, your goals, your values, and realizing that most of them were never yours to begin with. You inherited them, you absorbed them, you were rewarded for repeating them. But when you begin to think deeply, truly deeply, you stop reacting, you stop defending, you stop reaching, and instead, you start witnessing. You begin to notice the invisible hands behind your choices, the emotional hooks behind your habits, the false promises beneath your purpose. You see the whole architecture, the layers, the patterns, the manipulation dressed as meaning, and in that moment, something shifts. You stop trying to win the game, because you finally see the game for what it is. You stop flinching when others lie to themselves, because you no longer lie to yourself. You stop needing the world to make sense, because you've made peace with how much of it never did. That's the cost of thinking deeply. You lose the comfort of illusion. You lose the warmth of belonging. You lose the thrill of chasing something you no longer believe in. But what you gain is something no one can take from you. Clarity, not loud, proud clarity, but quiet, still, unshakable. You begin to move differently, not slower but calmer, not colder but clearer. You're no longer pulled by every opinion. You're no longer triggered by every demand. You're no longer seduced by every offer, because when you see the strings, you stop dancing. And that is terrifying, not to you, but to the world. Because now you can't be manipulated. You can't be provoked. You can't be sold a dream you've already outgrown. You see through the slogans. You hear the lie inside the language. You feel the emptiness behind the noise. And instead of reacting, you just breathe. You don't fight the system. You don't obey it either. You simply stop playing. not as an act of rebellion, but as a quiet declaration, I see you and I'm done. That's the moment the system loses its grip. Because here's the raw truth. No one can control a man who no longer believes in the prize. No one can shame a man who no longer seeks approval. No one can trap a mind that sees the trap for what it is. And that is freedom. But make no mistake, it comes with a price. You will lose people. You will lose certainty. You will lose the feeling of being on the right path, because that path was never yours. You'll feel alone. You'll feel misunderstood. You'll feel the weight of carrying a truth that no one around you wants to see. But you'll also feel something else, something rare, something sacred. You'll feel free, not because the world changed, but because you no longer need it to. You've stepped outside the illusion, and now you see it all, you feel it all, and yet it can't touch you, because you've learned how to think, not react, not repeat. Think, and that kind of thinking, that deep, calm, dangerous kind of thinking, doesn't just make you free, it makes you untouchable. So if you're here, still listening, still walking, then you've already started the journey. And the deeper you go, the less you'll need the world to agree with you. Because once you've seen the structure behind every game, you stop playing. Not with hate, not with ego, but with peace. And that is the quiet power they never saw coming.